Good afternoon, everyone. I am joined here today by the Framingham Chief of Police, Lester Baker, Lieutenant Blaise Tassoni, also from the Framingham Police, Assistant District Attorney Catherine Folger, and Detective Lieutenant William Donahue from the Massachusetts State Police. As you know, today, after a 12-day trial, a Middlesex Superior Court jury found Stephen Paul Gale guilty of 4 counts of aggravated rape, 2 counts of kidnapping, and armed robbery. This brought to an end an incident that began at the Hit or Miss store in Framingham over 36 years ago. On the morning of December 27th, 1989, Stephen Paul Gale entered the Hit or Miss, showed a handgun, and forced the 2 female employees, a manager and a clerk, into the back room, threatened, and then sexually assaulted them. One of those women, with absolutely no reason to know back in 1989 how valuable the evidence would become, was able to preserve some of the critical evidence that contained Stephen Paul Gale's DNA, evidence that later played a key role in identifying their attacker. A sketch was distributed of the assailant, but still for over 34 years, the identity of that assailant remained unknown. This investigation spanned more than 3 decades. It involved many false starts, ups and downs, and long periods without answers. Despite the passage of time, the victims in this case showed tremendous perseverance. They never gave up hope, and they never wavered in the pursuit of finding answers and being available for anything that needed to be done. Beginning in 2022, this office began using investigative genetic genealogy. By 2023, we had been able to identify some family members of the assailant, and in 2024, we had new leads that allowed us to identify Stephen Paul Gale as the individual who had left that DNA in the store during that attack. During those years, the defendant had evaded justice. He lived under multiple false identities, moved across states, and even when law enforcement ultimately approached him, attempted to flee. This case and today's verdict is a powerful example of the promises that underlay my decision in 2019 to create a cold case unit. The objective was for that unit to reassess cases, to root out new leads, and to employ the latest in technology to bring answers for victims, survivors, and their families. These older cases present substantial challenges, as you can imagine. People move, they get older, they retire, and they require relentless investigative work and dedicated resources. The verdict today reflects our ability to do that work with prosecutors and law enforcement partners who have a shared commitment to victims, to survivors, and to using every possible tool as it becomes available to achieve justice. This case would not have come to resolution without the commitment of the law enforcement partners standing with me today, as well as the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory, the United States Marshal Service, the FBI, Bodie Labs, Parabon Nano Labs, and the Los Angeles Police Department, a police department who is led by an individual who has some ties to New England, being a proud graduate of St. Anselm's. They were instrumental, along with many other federal, state, and law enforcement partners, as we traversed the country, the 6 different states where Stephen Paul Gale had lived at some point or had connections. So it was truly a national effort to identify him, to locate him, and then to return him to Massachusetts. We know that for survivors, when years pass without answers and without anyone being held accountable, that the trauma is in many cases intensified. And for everybody who is in that position, who wonders, has too much time passed for me to get an answer, either for myself or for my family? We can today, 36 and a half years after this event took place, confidently answer that question, that it is never too late. We do not forget, we do not stop, we continue to move forward looking for the answers in these cases. And that is a great testament to the work of folks in our office as well as to our partners. I'd now turn it over to Chief Baker.
Good evening. I too want to acknowledge the survivors of this case. Their tremendous courage is an inspiration to the entire Framingham Police Department. I can't speak enough about them. I also want to acknowledge Lieutenant Blaze Sassoni and the entire Framingham Police Detective Bureau. Their relentless work on this over decades. Retired, current detectives that have worked this case just speaks tremendous volumes. And I need to reiterate the DA's comments about the cooperation, basically the collaboration between federal, state, and local law police departments pretty much across the country, working together to solve this. Thank you.
We'll take a few questions.
Dan, can you talk about sentencing and how that will work and how sentencing may have changed from 1989 to current and what that means going forward on Monday?
So the sentencing will be on Monday, as you mentioned, and the defendant will be sentenced in accordance with what the penalties were at the time he committed the offense.
We'd seen that you mentioned he lived in 6 states prior to this.
I had connections there, yeah.
And then that there had been some allusion in the trial itself to other women who may have had interactions with him. Are you aware of any other investigations or any other allegations that may have come out as a result of him being brought to trial here? Any other potential victims associated with Stephen Gale?
We know of some things, as you intimated, there were references to things. I'm not aware of anything currently pending.
I just have 2 questions.
Sure.
I was here when you announced that this technology, I think you referenced in 2022 or 2023. Can you just talk about how big of a game changer, obviously, that was in this case and other cases, and kind of this like relentless pursuit that you are talking about, 3 decades of doing this? How big of a deal was that technology in this?
It's enormous because beginning in 2001, the crime laboratory, having developed a profile from the material they had, was able to upload that to begin a comparison. And they were, that is constantly doing a comparison. A comparison, obviously, like fingerprints or something else, only works if you have the person's information in there to be matched. So despite the fact that we had that profile, it was being run, we were not able to make a match. When you use forensic genealogy, it's important to note it is only another investigative tool. What it is able to do is see if the profile you have can be matched to anyone that is some degree of relation to the person who left that DNA. So you might find that a particular person is a maternal relative, removed in a way that indicates they're a second cousin. That doesn't tell you who is responsible. What it tells you is now you go and look at that family tree. I have a lot of first cousins and second cousins. You would find that whole pool. You would separate out whether you're looking for a male or a female. You then would, especially in a case like this, there will be some people that weren't alive or weren't of an age 35 or 36 years ago when they could have committed that crime. Then you're looking for who might have been in a place where they would have had an opportunity to commit the crime. And you continue to narrow that search until you get to someone who would appear to be somebody. And then that's, there's no substitute in these cases, even using technology, for real police work and dogged investigation, which we saw from our partners. Because even once we were able to make an identification of a family group, it was the police work that ultimately led us. Because what you always have to do is at some point have a DNA sample from the person who is your suspect, and if you have followed the right road, you then have a DNA profile developed from that sample from the person that should be a match to what you had. So it opens up a whole new way of being able to identify people.
You giving credit to the cold case for the amount of work that was involved in this, but I keep going back to it. I can't help but wonder if the young woman had not taken those immediate actions after this assault. Is Stephen Gale still a free man today in your mind if she hadn't done what she did in the moments afterwards?
There are lots of things that can happen, as we saw just last week with the case where somebody ultimately made a statement, the case up in Tingsboro, the individual ultimately told a friend about what he had done, and that person, being a real hero, came forward and told what had been told to him. So there are lots of ways a case could get resolved. I think it is remarkable, both that in the midst of a terrifying incident with a gun being pointed at them, that one of the victims in this case had the presence of mind, having no thought as to how this might be successful, knew enough to save some of that material. So I think that is just an amazing turn of events that certainly made today's resolution possible.
I'm curious, did you hear the victim impact statements today or have a look at them? And could you just speak more broadly to what Chief was kind of mentioning, the bravery of these victims to come out like that, particularly in front of him?
I think it is the same presence of mind that both of them showed. Both, you know, when a violent event happens like this, most importantly is having the presence of mind to do what you need to do to keep yourself safe. And both of them did that. You know, think about just being in an empty store, a gun being pointed at you. It was the 2 days after Christmas, there's not much going on outside. Remember, it's 1989, everybody's not carrying a cell phone around, there's just less communication. The fact that they had the presence of mind both to save some of that material, to get a good enough look to be able to develop a sketch, then to be prudent enough to wait out the suspect leaving, get themselves out of the store. You may have heard the testimony, they went up over a chain link fence, damaging their hands, not fully dressed, freezing cold, to make their way to a house to get help. That took incredible courage. And throughout this process, they have really been committed to doing whatever needed to be done, whether it was, you know, just going public about something like this. Just having your face shown requires a great deal of perseverance and courage. And being collaborative with us. This has been a long and difficult investigation, a 12-day trial. They have been remarkable in that way.
Talking nearly 40 years here, and you mentioned their willingness to come forward and the work that they did with you. I do wonder though, did they ever, in your sense, did they lose hope? I mean, did you feel like they always felt that this day was going to come?
I think they certainly thought that they would get to an answer. It's not difficult to imagine over that span of time, if you think, you know, of life and all the things that happen, to think nothing is ever going to come of this. And there were lots of false starts. There were lots of things that seemed to be promising and then didn't get us to the right place. And again, that is another piece of just perseverance and having remarkable courage to continue to stay with something in the hopes of getting to the day we got to today.
Thank you.
Thank you.